just so everybody knows and like that. Um, Thank you so much for being with us for this beautiful evening. This is our holiday gift to the community. Uh, my name is Samsara Morgan, Executive Director of Open Better Birth Foundation and Better Birth Association of Harlem and Schiffer Circle Community Doula Program. And thank you for joining us for Decolonizing Childbirth, Reclaiming Yoni Traditions with Sarah Hussein, MA. Um, this is a wonderful workshop to me. It means a lot to me emotionally because I love the presenter personally very much. She was one of my students quite a while ago when she was a little girl. And she's
Oh my
certainly
God, and
old.
now I'm old.
Now you're all grown up. You're not old. I'm so and you were working on this, and correct me if I say anything correctly, but you were working on this thesis when you were in my class. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in my master's program, so that's where I first started kind of delving into this subject.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then since then, I've taken it and really continued to grow and evolve and teach it in different venues. Yeah.
Definitely.
So,
And so it was my great pleasure to, after hearing about this amazing thesis, Sarah came back to the doula class to present it to all of us, and we were all just blown away. And it was particularly moving to me seeing the intersection between my faith tradition and Islamic faith tradition. You'll learn about that more later. So that really warmed my heart. I've got my little Santa sweater on, so I'm ready to be in a holiday mood. And looking at positive intersections between faith traditions definitely warms my heart. And I can't wait to hear Sarah present again and see how the words have grown since the last time I heard her share them. Unfortunately, Sarah has a computer camera issue, so you won't be able to see it. Um, you'll see her name and you'll hear her voice, and she says, I have you set up to be able to screen share, so you'll be able to see her slides, but you won't be able to see her, which is a bummer. But I'll post your picture after the workshop so everybody can see what you look like.
thank you.
So I will turn it over to you, my dear.
Okay. Thank you so much for that sweet introduction. And I'm very honored also to be here, like, I think probably 18, 19 years later.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of scary.
That's amazing.
And still having the opportunity to share this work as, life goes on. And I'm very happy to be here during COVID and all of that. But this is the first time I've taught this in this kind of just totally technological way. I love being with students and being able to, like, have them interact and be really part of that organic chemistry.
Definitely.
So some of you I can see, I appreciate that. I'm
You want
sorry
some
that
spaghetti?
Oh,
Should I make rice?
I'm just
Everybody turn off their
Rice or
audio if you're
spaghetti?
not a presenter.
so yeah, I will. I'm Samsara, do I have an hour or 2 hours? I
You
don't.
have till 9 o'clock.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and start going through.
Mhm.
I have actually 2 sets of slides from different courses I've taught, and I'm kind of weaving them together. So what I really hope that everybody kind of hold space for, Samsara touched on it, really delving into the intersectionality of kind of that shared tapestry we have of race, history, religion, politics, medicine, and kind of digging in through our own self-reflective process of our traditions, of our spirituality, of our wisdom that is carried through us, and kind of in that beautiful space. So it's a little bit of my journey, a little bit of the things I've researched, and also it's really just kind of honoring that sacred tradition that we all have, and like moving past a paradigm where we're kind of blocked by colonization and our limitations of how we're socialized and things like that. So I hope that comes across. Give me thumbs up, at least, because I can't have any other kind of interaction. And I'll just go ahead and get started. So let me share these slides here. Can everybody see that?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, like I said, a new technological thing.
Mhm.
So I'm on 2 screens here in my home office with these slides up. So bear with me with switching between them. So as I said, when I was studying for my master's, I really started to delve into our history of, people of color, indigenous people in this world and our movement patterns, and kind of sought to understand how we are in this world almost so disconnected from each other through so much trauma. And I started piecing together some very interesting lines of thought. So I'm sure that some of you are very well aware of colonialism and imperialism, but if you study the roots of words, I really like to look at where our words come from and how that really sinks into our being. And, we carry that through from our ancestors and to our children. So looking at how colonialism has impacted all of us in our personal lives, Merriam-Webster defines colonialism as, basically dominating by force. And that force really gets to a deeper level. That force is colonial force is often a violence that's physical, structural, psychological. Frantz Fanon, some of you are probably familiar. Give thumbs up if you know who Frantz Fanon is. I don't know if I can see those thumbs up though on my end, but basically he kind of defined that root of colonialism and how that violence affected and impacted us. And he really broke down how that was taken through on an institutional level. So really imperialism is perpetuated through violence, and the violence divides us. That violence is epistemic, so it goes to the root of our knowledge and it teaches us something about ourselves. And from that, we internalize a sense of identity, and it often separates ourselves from our spiritual base. So my next slide. When I started to study how that came through to our current context, which I would say is, post-colonial imperialism, Western imperialism, and we're seeing a change now. So we'll see where as we grow and evolve, but kind of looking at the beginning of how we would see our contemporary world and the way that it's broken into nation states really started out of the Roman Empire. So Western imperialism, obviously there's many empires in the world, but currently we're still on an extension of this tradition. And this is the tradition that has informed the development of our institutions. So in history, it's very clear that the date 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea was like a pinnacle point in the forming of imperialism in this contemporary way that we're experiencing, like nation states and all of that. Roman Emperor Constantine I saw that basically by forcing a doctrine of like one over all others, he could create a system by which to otherize people. And then from there, we move into the Crusades, and also we move into in the Western, in Europe, the medieval times. So basically in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, there was a diverse Christian tradition that was alive from, throughout the Mediterranean, East, in Africa, and through, Europe. And people had active traditions that honored their connection to the earth. They used herbs, midwives, there was healers. When this addendum kind of came out, anybody who did not adopt that universal idea of one God, one faith, one church, one empire, one emperor was like completely um, violated in every way. So that central issue of Jesus's divinity was a huge part of that. And basically, what we saw at that time was prior to that council, there was that diversity, and people kind of lived in a sense of like there was different beliefs, and people honored each other's spirituality, people used herbs, all of that in the Western sense. But after this, once this creed was established, that's when the medieval times, the Crusades started, as well as just all of the early violence that happened in Europe to create that nation state. Do people have a reference of this? Is hard because I can't see anybody, so I'm like, maybe I'm going too fast, but
No, you're
okay.
good. You're very good.
So a big part of that, and why I speak to it in this context, because we are talking about midwifery and kind of the way we connect with our work as midwives through our spiritual base, is because that idea of like one God, one faith, one church, one emperor was really based on this idea that if man is Jesus and Jesus is God and man is God, then there's automatically this otherized entity that we should fear. And in fearing that other, one human can perpetuate violence against another. So I really look at that as one way that violence is used as a force to separate, because if we didn't have another, then we wouldn't have somebody to fear.
Right.
And also, previous to that, our spiritual traditions and our like wisdom told us that like man and woman oftentimes was whole, was one part of the other, was together, was all an important part of the society, and had different stations of elevation within that and different roles or whatever. But it wasn't this like same type of division between man and woman. So it was a conscious political choice to create that other.
Yep.
Okay, so moving along. So I just want to give some examples of how this played out, because it was a very clear political agenda. By 1486, the Malleus Maleficarum, which is known as the Hammer of Witches, basically came out in order to violently separate like men and women from each other, and kind of set this seeding of fear to create institutions to control us. With this, it was known as the Hammer of Witches. It was required reading by, it says there, I hate reading what I write, but it was required reading for Roman Catholic judges and magistrates. So basically, like all the judges in the Catholic Church were required to read this. They defined witchcraft as coming from women's insatiable carnal lust, and also created this idea that women is imperfect and more animalistic, and man is from the sex that is like from Christ, because Christ is a man. And they say that midwives do the most harm to the Catholic faith. So, there's a lot of different, we know that we don't even know really the true estimate, but so many people were killed in the early Christian patriarchal time that it was just like the Crusades and all of that also had a lot of these experiences where it was very clear that like violence and separating the women and the men was like a part of that political agenda. So you can see this because the word, again, looking at words and their roots, I started to look at how we understand women's bodies like in the West. So like tying it into our medical institutions. Um, in The American Way of Birth, which you may have read since you're in this field, Jessica Mitford says that the medical institution was formed basically in order to consolidate church hegemony, and all of the burnings coincided with the rise of medical practitioners, because basically this was at the point at which women in the West were separated from their station as healers, as midwives, as wise women. They killed women who were single, elder women. They also, eh, you know, anything that basically threatened what they were trying to build in terms of ideology and diversity. So, like, there was a clear separation. By 1682, at that time, that was right during the Crusades and during the Inquisition. At this time, the word vaginae actually meant a sheath or a scabbard for a sword, because at that time, when they were going on these crusades or during the Inquisition, trying to kind of colonize the people in first in Europe, at that time, the crusaders or the, the priests, they would come in, they would rape women and cut off the outer labia and then ring it onto their swords. And then just, by not even that much longer, 220 odd years later, that word actually became attested into the medical dictionaries to mean vagina, what we all know as vagina, you know. So in my opinion, when you look at the history of how this institution was created on this extremely patriarchal and violent purpose of colonization and to create a separation amongst us, and then you look at what the vagina actually means within that institution, it really is a place to be violated and cut. That's literally what it means.
Absolutely.
So I just always pause there in my class
Yeah.
because like I'm not vibing with you guys, but I have to slow down.
No, you're doing great, and the material is hard, so
It's dense. Yeah, it's dense. So
this is a very good place to just kind of take a breath.
Yeah.
And if I may say, this is why I don't use the word vagina.
And actually, I can like stop and pause here if there's something somebody wants to ask or
does somebody have a question or
think
comment?
about.
Thank you, Sarah. I had just put in the comments, I'm not sure about this, but from what I remember studying women in religion, I think the last slide, the late 1400s was also the same time where Thomas of Aquinas said like nuns cannot teach. So up until a certain point, nuns were able to move through the ranks and become like leaders of teaching within the Catholic Church. And then my memory is that at the same time that this was all happening, they also stopped nuns from becoming elevated figures.
Nunneries were like the equivalent of universities for women. And of course the head folk at the nunneries had a great deal of power, and nuns could receive communion from other nuns, from the head mother of the nunnery, and all that what you're talking about, all that changed after this time.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I know I covered like a kind of a big arc, but starting in that 325 AD all the way through the 1900s, you're really seeing the rise of Western imperialism, and basically starting on that kind of religious foundation that, again, I really try to say we all had active, ripe spiritual traditions. And it was very clear at that point that they were creating one ideology that trumped others, because there were widely held beliefs around if Jesus was a man, quote unquote, or if he was a prophet. And and a man being equal to God, because people had different beliefs. I'm not saying what that is for every person. I'm saying the link between making it a gender was a key part of the beginning of this project. And having violence upon women was also a key process and project, and then setting up a medical institution on top of that that is very patriarchal. So okay, so the next slide. Okay, so here I kind of write that. So what we have at the bottom, of this pyramid is we have, I don't know when I did this slide and put marginalized communities, but in that context of power, right? You have a contrast where the elite have this power, and then below are communities that are controlled, but we have to put violence at the base of that control, because whether it's psychological, whether it's physical, whether it's structural, it's so deep in our system, and the institutions that we maneuver through constantly are based on this foundation that's very deep historically. So I know we all love Bell Hooks, and she calls it white supremacist capitalist patriarchal hegemony, and I like to just call it out as such. So it's definitely based on that fear and distrust and of the other, and the first other is the feminized other. From that we move into the colonization of other lands, and then using that same mental disconnection to create all those systems of oppression, whether it's economics or race or nationalism, however that power, banking, all of that. So again, part of my project is to really weave these things together. So coming into what even now is labeled or is defined, how we define obstetric violence, because as we move through the field as birth workers, we'll come into contact with people who are, doing work from different angles, and obstetric violence is a recognized medical term. And it's defined as the appropriation of the body and reproductive processes of women by health personnel, which is expressed as dehumanized treatment and abuse of medication, and to convert the natural processes into pathological ones, bringing with it a loss of autonomy and the ability to decide freely about their bodies and sexuality, and negatively impacting the quality of life of women. So even within this institution, we recognize that obstetric violence is actually, the purpose of it is to, impact and create an impact in our loss of autonomy through dehumanization. So I know as we grow as birth workers, you'll see and experience these things, and you may have already, may have things to reflect on that, but definitely we see that dehumanization. This one, I don't know if I'm going to go through 13. So again, just kind of looking also at microaggressions, which I'm not going to go into too much. But I did want to touch on a few, as overall, I'm just kind of introducing you or reminding you, or you might know way more than me about some of the things I share, but since I looked at a lot of how this violence was actually projected into our communities, and some of the things that some of our communities may have experienced as an extension of that colonial violence. So we look at the reproductive justice movement by women of color. And, I really obviously point out, like, that's not a pro-choice movement, that's the reproductive justice movement. And it's not actually for whether or not I want to have an abortion or get on birth control. The reproductive justice movement's really speaking to like our experience as BIPOC, just going through this institutionalizing process where we're separated from our humanity, and then we experience this, these invasions and intrusions. So J. Marion Sims, I'm sure most of you know, is known actually as the father of obstetrics and gynecology. And he had done the most inhumane, violent, open surgeries with no anesthesia on slaves. And he created many of the surgeries we still use and are even some named after him. When you go to medical school or nursing school, you learn about him as a great founder. He believed that his enslaved African women didn't feel pain, so therefore he could, traumatize them over and over. Many communities have, gone through forced sterilization or even having their babies taken by the government. Native Americans, indigenous people, constantly still so many missing children, but institutionally also taken, so breaking apart the family. Obviously, we know so many different ways families have been broken um, during slavery and through, many other systems. We know about the Tuskegee experiments, birth control testing, vaccine campaigns for sterilized people oftentimes. Of course, we know about higher rates of maternal and infant mortality due to just the constant racism and pressure and trauma that is experienced. Uncompassionate care, all of these things that you guys all know about. But beyond just being social injustices, or it's really about a deeper colonizing effort to, again, traumatize and disconnect us from our traditions and each other as we experience those things. Okay, let's see. So yeah, I guess here I had more details about what I already said. And then here in Puerto Rico, there was also some forced sterilization. So I just wanted to give some examples. I really like one of my teachers, her definition of the Western medical industrial complex is couched in a deceptive framework of benevolence. Western medicine is a violent institution that has, in fact, been dangerous to the health and well-being of women of color and women in the third world since its imposition. The provision of care subjugates women of color in our communities by negating indigenous knowledge of body health and healing. And so we can look at all that history and everything, but in this process, it's really also about rooting out our own traditions and our own connection to our work and really holding space for this decolonizing effort and what that means to unpack that for ourselves and for our clients, really. Knowing in that definition, I really look at Western medicine as a tool of colonialism that has violence embedded in its history, structure, framework, culture, technology, and even terminology, as I showed. And it's an active side of, quote, imperialism, which, is that separation. So my definition of that is colonialism and imperialism. We can look at it on all these levels, but it's really that project. So I don't think I don't know what time it is. So 7:37. Okay.
7:37. Yeah.
And I have a whole nother set. So I want to give time at the end too. So let's see. Yes. I guess then I did, just in terms of a workshop, reflect on some of those projects we can do with our clients, because really many of you, if not already, are going to go and attend birth in a completely vast settings, Some of you might work at home, some of you might support women in the hospital, but really working with our clients to move from like paternalistic, service-oriented, institutional, individual focus to kind of honor what other traditions they may find important or you may find important in that work. So kind of looking at what are the spaces for decolonizing birth. We're getting a really wonderful opportunity with COVID. You know, COVID is obviously not wonderful, but there's a big shift in people's openness to having their babies out of hospital settings. And as I'm going to go into my next set of slides, I'm kind of going to talk more about how, you know, that that shift from what people can experience through a medicalized birth and then just what they can experience, you know, when they are the ones guiding their care with their family and with support, how it can influence, you know, the whole bonding of the mom, the baby, the family. So again, going into a little bit of science, I guess, I wanted to share the definition for physiological birth because I want to honor this all the spaces we find where we're really speaking to what would it be if we were not separated through violence and, you know, subjugation in those medical settings. What would it be if we could move through our care that is offered to us and it honored our experiences, you know? So again, working in different settings, in home birth, there's opportunity to honor that, but anywhere that women birth, I would like to see people find this honoring. So speaking about the science is important because that's a really important part of birth. And I define here, this is actually from the American College of Nurse Midwives and the National Association of Certified Professional Midwives. They came up with a definition of physiological birth to really basically, even through that system and in terminology in the medical and in the field, kind of talk about what is the difference between a physiological birth and an interventive birth, and how does that impact everything. So you see here their definition. They state that normal physiological birth is characterized by a spontaneous onset of progression in labor. It includes biological and psychological conditions that promote effective labor, results in the vaginal birth of the infant and the placenta, results in physiological blood loss, facilitates newborn transition, and supports early initiation of breastfeeding. And basically, they said that a physiological birth is one without interference, complications, and in line with normal body functions. So this is really basically taking a statement against, you know, if a woman is left alone, truly, she can have a normal physiological birth without interference and complications. And we need to create a space for that because this institution, as we saw, was created on a lot of violence. So here's just a quick example where you see how this cascade of interventions could impact. So just like to having one intervention basically will lead you down to a higher chance of cesarean just by the nature of its interference with that flow of physiological birth. And to get a little bit more, I think it's important as we go into birth work to understand a little bit about our hormone flow and how our endocrine system actually primes us to that connection and not that separation. So you have a very heightened state in which we as humans, mothers and babies and our families and the fathers and the people that are there have an intensely heightened opportunity to bond and connect and experience this physiological birth, but when you have interventions, it disrupts that hormone. So literally on a deep endocrine hormonal level, that connection is being attacked. And so these hormones are just some of the hormones that happen during labor and birth and postpartum that kind of increase that. And again, with frequent monitoring, narcotics, epidural anesthesia, pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, all of those things kind of compromise the opportunity for a physiological birth and lead to greater intervention. So reinforcing birth as a place of connection, as a place of love, as a place of all of that, and then to have it attacked at its core, you know, first by very specifically going after midwives and then threading this violence through our medical institution. So another deep breath.
Definitely. I believe there were a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure. I'll
If you
stop
could-
for
Yeah,
sure.
look in the chat and see if there was a couple of questions I thought I saw
I'm
popping up.
not sure how.
The bottom
Okay.
of the screen says chat, and then you click.
Oh,
chat.
okay.
Here you go. And then someone had a
I
question.
have a question.
Sure.
My question was just the definition that you gave us of obstetric violence.
Mhm.
I was just wondering who wrote that definition, where it came from.
Yeah, I do have that. I have to go look where I have it because I had my source for that. And I think I think I might have said it was like a medical term. It's not a medical term, but it is. I don't want to state that it's a medical term. I'll email Samsara my source for that because I just used to have it in the slides and I don't know why I took it out. So I don't want to say where I got that definition. But I'll get it because
Okay.
it's in my notes somewhere.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Deja mentioned the Mississippi appendectomy, which kind of speaks for itself. But did you want to speak about that briefly, Deja? Is she still here? Okay, so we'll move on.
Okay. So I'm going to switch sets of slides here. So give me a second. I have to figure out how to do that because it's a different. I'm trying to figure out something. Oops.
So
Okay.
while you're doing that, I'm going to ask one of my assistants to please post the Eventbrite link in the chat. And that way, anyone who is not a regular member of Schiffer Circle and is joining us as a guest and who wants to make a contribution to our work can do that. Really appreciate it. This year, due to COVID, a lot of our fundraisers have been taken off the table. And so this is one of our big fundraisers for the end of this year, this amazing 2020 year.
Okay, so am I still on or am I muted or?
You're still on.
Okay. I had a little accidentally opened and closed something, but okay. So this next set is really going through, you know, the decolonizing project of looking at our traditions, our indigenous wisdom, our social, our culture, our ethnic traditions that we share with one another and our families, and finding that space where we can honor, just like I find space to honor physiological birth and a birth that is more connected, however my clients most find that to be important to them. I also felt like it was important for me to move through where my traditions honored that and share that with other women of faith. So I started to look at the Islamic traditions of pregnancy and birth, and did a module on that. And I also have studied like the Yoni traditions and some other things where we can really kind of start to look at our own traditions to bring that out and share that with each other as another really important process in decolonizing for ourselves in our own practice and what we bring to our birth work. So I'm just trying to figure out how to flip the slide on this one. Okay. So first,
So right now I'm not seeing I don't think I'm seeing your slide. I'm looking at
some post
Zoom.
attendee.
It says
Oh, Zoom. Okay, hold on. I'm sharing the wrong screen.
it has
Okay.
happened to me
Yeah.
many times.
Okay, let me just maybe move it over if I can. Okay, this might work. Can you see
There you
it?
go.
Okay.
Yes.
So now let me figure out how to make it present. Okay.
There you go.
So we were going to be on slide 1. Okay. So really this started opening up for me as a Muslim. One of the main prayers, or the beginning of every prayer, the beginning of the Quran, starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And really that means in the name of Allah, or our creator, the most beneficent, the most compassionate. And I learned that while this is like the beginning of the Quran, as well as every single prayer, or even like just before they eat or before they take on a new task, people would say over and over again, is like the first opening line of our connection through that spiritual tradition to the heavens. And that, like I described there, is a really important phrase and opening for all Muslims. And every single Muslim knows that. As I dug deeper, I found that, the phrase not only kind of opens everything for every prayer or every kind of like spiritual um practice, it's like but I'm sure you've heard it, so but it's a very common phrase. The really beautiful part about that came when I'm like going into that the root of that. So again, I mentioned that I like to look at words and their etymology and how that impacts us. What I found was that in Arabic, the word raham, which is like those two attributes or those two descriptions of the creator, the base word, so the origin word is ram, and that is basically telling us through an etymological source about our nature and our spiritual connection, to guide us to what our creator is, like what that source is. And that word actually means womb, like womb, our womb in our beautiful bodies. So when I kind of like deconstructed that, it really also went past that patriarchy that we see in religions, to think that the most important phrase, the root of that whole phrase that pins these attributes of the creator to us, literally translates to womb. And then I started to think like, well, that's a pretty powerful creator there. The womb is the creator. And that was really powerful for me. And I brought that into my work because it's also important to know that that attribute and that root ties to mercy and compassion in the world. So digging a little deeper with that, I'm just trying to switch these slides. I started to interrogate like alternative meanings that we have that are preserved through our traditions, and how they are empowering and feminist, and they can take us out of that layer of colonization of how we have all from day one been indoctrinated to think of the vagina in contrast to something so beautiful that could describe our power through our feminine bodies. It's a very different word
Definitely.
and a very different, it gives us a different sense of ourself. So again, that understanding of ourself, the epistemological understanding, it teaches us about ourself. It gives us knowledge about who we are and what is in our body. The womb in Islam is very elevated. It's our wombs that connect us. And basically, the universe and the heavens are expressed through the passage from a spiritual plane to a physical material world through this womb. So it's just so beautiful to me and powerful that I wanted to shift my paradigm. So many people say Yoni, that's another really beautiful description. But I really consciously do not like to even say the word, the V word.
Mhm.
The V monologues are not empowering to me.
Yeah.
But I think that we have these traditions in all of our communities, and it's part of that decolonizing project is like digging those out and like reclaiming them so that we can shift our ideas about ourselves and send that to our future generations as well through the womb. So I just wanted to give a few examples of the concept of Raham from the Quran. Um, one of the phrases of the Quran, one of the scripture verses says that, you know, be conscious of the creator, and basically all of you have mutual rights and have to honor the womb that bore you. So we all have different relationships with our mamas. I know I have a complicated one, but I think this is speaking past what we see, expressing through all the violence that we're carrying from our ancestors and through this project of colonization, that the womb is not honored, our connection to each other is not honored, and we're not honoring that we're spiritual beings in this physical realm. um, and shifting that paradigm, shifting our consciousness around what the womb is, however we all find that, and even tying it to some of the other themes I've covered, like scientifically with physiological birth, and then just that political project of creating an other and all that violence. We really start to see like we need to find a space to honor this, you know, we need to bring this honor to ourselves as connected beings and connected to the heavens into our practice and into our life. So another saying was that all of the compassion in this world only amounts to 1/99th, like only one part of that infinite power and compassionate comes to the earth, but it comes through the wombs. And I think that's important too, because when we disconnect women from their opportunity to have a physiological birth without intervention, then we are also disrupting the hormonal spiritual priming of us to be connected to each other and through this power, right? It's a physiological process, but it's also a very spiritual process. And if we make it so medical that we break it into these, you know, we break it down so much, we're also really disrupting that connection, basically. So I just see how that ties across the science as well. And I like to always bring that up.
Mhm.
So I know that I wanted to get to, let's see, slide 9. I had a lot of, so another example of where I found through the Quran that was like a shift from the, misogyny and patriarchy of the early Catholic Church, was around, Miriam, who is the mother of Jesus, Virgin Mary, as we move to uh, our Christmas time and our winter solstice. Mary is the mother of Jesus in Christianity, but in Islam, she's also the most elevated woman and she's very honored. And she has a whole chapter of the Quran basically about her. That attribute, the Rahman, the attribute of beneficence and compassion, is repeated in the chapter 16 times. So I look at numerology too and look at those patterns. Um, so another huge part of this chapter is that Miriam's birth to Jesus is described in a very different way than in Christianity. Um, as I mentioned, in Islam, in the tradition, Miriam is actually known to be a very high spiritually honored woman. She grows up very protected and very connected to the creator. And she has that that's it's more her that is this beautiful soul that the community was holding in esteem. People would bring her gifts. They wouldn't see her, but they would bring her gifts because she would pray for them and her prayers were so powerful. Um, Again, in Christianity, so in uh the Quran also, Mary, Virgin Mary is pregnant without, conception. And it's a miracle conception because it's believed that she, since she was so protected and she was such a high spiritual leader in that community, she lived actually in a monastery and nobody was able to see her. So when they say she was a virgin, people understood that she was a virgin because they knew that, she didn't have the opportunity to, she was kind of this protected
Cloister.
spiritual leader. Exactly. So she wasn't in a position to where she was seeing men. And also it's believed that the angel Gabriel came to tell her that she would be pregnant. And then she said, of course, like, how can that be? Because nobody has, touched me. And it was believed that she also she accepted it because the angel Gabriel also told her that at that her community would ostracize her for some time, but that they would, once she brought her son, he would be so revered and they would, kind of, how time will tell. So
They'll
that,
understand.
yeah, they'll understand when they see that, your son is a prophet and who he really is. And um so basically with that, it wasn't her, who she was is very described, and her life is very described, as well as just how special she was. But for midwives and for Muslim women who are birthing, I think another really important part of this chapter is the story of Miriam's birth and how awesome it is. So, in I believe in Christianity, she has her manger. And I also want to say that, in my own like full study of different aspects, I also look at astrology, and I do see the heavens as a metaphor for to teach us about our nature and who we are. And I do want to share that Virgo, the constellation is associated with the Virgin Mary. And at the time, Jesus as the son, that he is the son, is also connecting to Jesus being the sun, like physically, the actual sun in our solar system, coming through the constellation of Virgo and shifting into a new age, to teach us something about compassion, the age of Pisces. So I really look at this and our stories, whether they are through, religious texts or myths, and to connect us to really our place in the universe and what the universe teaches us. About ourselves and our nature and all of that. So, like I said, a beautiful part of this chapter, Mary is in labor and she basically has to leave alone. So, she's actually in the Islamic story and in the Quran, she goes alone to the desert. And when the pains of labor drove her to such pain or, discomfort, she basically had this beautiful river that opened up at her feet, and the dry date palm tree started to drop juicy dates down, and she was able to sustain herself with through her labor flow. So she was having nice, nutritious protein and vitamins, which is, I also teach this part because dates are really amazing in labor. Samsara will share.
Exactly.
They're really amazing in labor. And I'm going to get into that too with the science. So, that's a huge part of the story where she's under this date tree and the dates drop for her. So it's teaching us about how to be nutritious and giving us a simple source that is extremely potent for pregnancy and literally is like nature's pregnancy multivitamin. And it's literally in this sacred scripture of the Quran. And now there's all these articles about how dates are so good for labor and all that. So I think that's, and also Miriam is alone. And so she's going through this really in that space of like faith, because she literally had nobody. It was an internal process. She was going through this journey. And when we look at birth tradition as, one of those momentous journeys we go on in different ways at different times, every time different, with our own or with the women that we support, we can see how there's that really part where a woman really has to go through it alone. So
That's where the courage is. I mean, that's
Mhm.
one of the things that really stirred my heart when you shared this information with me. This the vision of this young woman out in the desert alone and having to turn to God, and
Yeah.
and God saying yes to her as she had said yes to God to
Yeah.
carry this child. God sustained her.
Yeah.
And that bit of faith, I see it certainly in my clients and all of our beautiful faith traditions. The clients that have a faith tradition and who can dig deep like that and reach up to God do so much better having their babies.
Yeah. I think it's also about like oftentimes in the journey of motherhood, we really do have to go through things
Yep.
alone. And even during labor, a supported labor, you have to find that strength to push through at some point, right? Because it's a journey for us and it's not going to be easy the whole, I mean, well, hey, every birth is different. Some
Mhm.
are and that's part of it, but it's that you have to, it's a very individual experience. No two births are ever the same.
Yep.
And in that we have to journey alone, but also in life sometimes we have to journey
Yep. Yep.
alone, as our children or, you know, in many ways. So I think it's just kind of speaking to that strength again. Um, so I think I jumped slides, but let's see. Okay, so yeah, that was okay. Okay, oh, here's the date one. So according to a National Institute of Health study, women who, so I have this one. I have where I found this one. Women who consumed date fruit had significantly higher cervical dilation upon admission compared to non-date consumers. Spontaneous labor occurred at a higher rate. The use of pitocin and oxytocin was significantly lower. And also, let's see, women who consume dates, basically, it was just concluded that
For
the
labor.
date fruit, yeah, it had so many, it lengthened the time before the length, it decreased your pregnancy time, decreased your labor time, made your labor less likely to have intervention. So I just think that that's a really like fun thing to share. And I do know that there's many ways that Muslim women incorporate this tradition into their life. So for example, where my family's from, when the baby is first born, the dad or the will take a little bit of the soft inside part of a date, put it on their um like on their mouth to soften it and have saliva break it down and literally rub it on the baby's gums, and the babies are like, hi, you know. So you also see how sometimes doctors will give babies glucose, but dates kind of have that,
Natural sugar.
natural sugar, but also so many other elements. So calcium, nerve impulse conduction is better red blood cell production, vitamin K. Oh, and vitamin K, we know, for coagulation after the baby's birth, is really important. And so I often share dates as a good thing to snack on in your pregnancy. Has good protein, good sugars, and it also is a good source of quick and clean energy, but also gives you some proteins, some B vitamins, all of that during labor. If you find, back to the practitioner part of me, if you find you have a mom who is a little bit dehydrated and also doesn't really want to eat, date is so digestible and can give her that energy without, another kind of intervention coming in. So Samsara might have some stories about that.
It is. I mean, I've certainly seen it be very, very helpful. And I do love that little newborn prayer when I've been blessed to serve
Yeah.
Islamic families.
So another thing that I share often, especially when I teach this class with Muslim moms, again, I look at etymology of words and kind of how that impacts us in the way that we understand ourselves and know ourselves and perceive the world. And breastfeeding is also a highly recommended, actually it's a right of babies in the Islamic tradition. It's actually a right. The baby has the right to breastfeed for 2 years, and then you can wean him or her, but you pretty much kind of give them their rights because it sets up their whole system, right? So we know that how important breast milk is. And some of the words associated around the breast and breast milk in particular really also speaks to a deeper scientific understanding. So Halim is a person who has forbearance and quietude, okay? Hilm means intellect. Halama means nipple. Gawaya, which is to like go the wrong way, means the inability to digest milk. So we know though that the word for milk, hilm, is actually the word for milk. It means intellect. And, now we know through science that so many brain cells and, are boosted by the process of breast milk, helping the baby's brain grow, based on its nutritional value. And also, quietude. We know that breast milk calms a baby, right? Often if a baby's fussy, that can bring them like kind of a sense of calm and quietude. So those are some other fun little words that I kind of dig into to just kind of bring us to another way of thinking about these things. Like, we're so caught up in the West to be arguing about the benefits of breastfeeding, but here it is in a different way of thinking that it means something so different. The value is intrinsic in the way that we understand ourselves, our lives, our world, our spirituality, and kind of what brought us to all these places. So I guess that's pretty much all I got for you guys. I'm kind of think I went a little fast in the beginning, but I think it's a good place to open it up for whatever you guys want to ask me. Ideas, comments, additions that you guys must know, so many things that this has brought up for you that you would like to share. I love to learn from you all.
Was there anything in the chats? Take a look back in there and see if somebody asked any questions.
Yeah, 'cause for some reason, oh, there is some chats.
Sarah, I want to thank you for digging into the etymology in particular, because I feel like our knowledge of English is partially limited just as Americans, but also English in and of itself. Going back to like Germanic languages, the roots of words aren't nearly as diverse as some of the other languages that are based in things like Sanskrit and other traditions and languages. So it's just really beautiful to hear the diversity of meaning of each word and how these like physical concepts relate to these metaphysical concepts through language. And I really appreciated you bringing that piece into it.
Yeah, I think that's totally an important part for all of us to kind of find those words as a way of understanding the world we live in, and what shapes us, both empowers us, but also creates these boundaries for us that we don't even realize because we think it's normal to say vagina, which is disgusting to me, to my core at this point, after teaching this class for 20 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Something that I also think is interesting is just how so many people, especially people of color, are shamed when using words other than vagina for our gynecological parts, body parts. Yeah, and that is so I just appreciated that also as another pushback for when people are shamed in those ways.
So there was a question in the chat around someone having a curiosity about the slides that were skipped and wondering if folks could have a copy of your thesis. Is that something that's available?
Yeah. So what would you guys like, the slides or, I mean, I have both. I don't mind sharing them with you guys.
So why don't you email it to me and then I can share it with this group?
Sure. The thesis has much more dense information. So I think if you really want to dig into some trains on the historical place, it has some more information there. So I can share those, just share it with you, email it to you, Samsara?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And just to be clear, that is just to be kept within the group?
Yeah, I would appreciate if you guys, I don't mind sharing it. I've shared it in a lot of different ways, but if just keep it for yourself, I guess, or if anybody's interested, I'm happy if they would like to contact me and I can share that as well.
Is it appropriate? Do you feel comfortable with us sharing it with clients?
Yeah,
it's up to you.
Well, I'm actually working on a few different actually book projects. So that's why it's a little push. I don't mind sharing it, but I also we'll be putting it out hopefully in more of a formal way through like a ebook or something like that.
Got you.
But
So
I definitely don't mind sharing the slides. Yeah. And the thesis, it's different from the books, but you know, I've worked on them for so long, so I do want to
I
keep
totally
working.
understand.
Yeah,
So we want to, that's why I'm asking what the boundaries are, you know?
sure.
Yeah, it's really good.
Because I want to share widely, but I also, you know,
Yeah,
want to formalize it and really make it available for people.
I totally get it. I totally get it. Well, one of the things I just want to say, one of the things that I loved about this process is, and what you've shared, that's I got to know a lot of the stuff that you didn't share, which is good stuff, and I'm glad everybody will be able to take a read of it. And just looking at, you know, how the dysfunctional patriarchy in which we live, how that has corrupted things over time, you know. So even in Islam, there are more patriarchal energies of Islam
Yeah,
that don't mention all of the what you
any of
said this
this.
evening,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And then there are also more loving and embracing parts of
Of
Christianity
course.
that that don't enforce the Malleus Maleficarum.
Yeah, of
Oh my
course.
God,
Yeah.
you know?
That's the part about like really kind of taking yourself and your traditions and your values and digging in and finding that even despite all of that, right, as humanity we're kind of meant to connect, and we have to remember that now, especially with COVID. And
Yeah. I love the piece about how the goddess can't be killed.
yes,
You know,
that's it.
in various stories and how people have lived and the different visions of that life force energy. Even in Catholic Christianity, which I'm Catholic, Mary is the intercessor. Like if you want to get to God, you call Mary. If you want to get to Jesus, you call Mary.
Hmm.
And that's a place of intense power, even though people do this strange mind thing about not giving her that power,
Hmm. Exactly.
but it's there.
And you know, she's there also as a very strong feminine powerful force in, you know, Latino culture
Absolutely.
with the Virgin. And so I feel that there's always these spaces where women, you know, in Hinduism too, we have that archetype. So I've really started to look at that archetype as a source.
Kuan Yin.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And of really raw feminine power. And I love that Islam has it so explicit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's not that, you know, there isn't that colonizing patriarchy that is through our organized religions, I want to say.
Exactly.
And you know, that's that colonizing force, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we have to watch that colonizing energy presenting itself in our lives on so many different levels. You know, colonized thinking and attitudes and behavior are the norm. Taking from other people against their will is the norm. It's what corporations do.
yeah.
You know, forcing people to do things and their objections, we just gloss over their objections. Um, you know, those are rape stories. So, you know, as we live our lives trying to be balanced and trying to be, uh, in my opinion, truly human, we have to watch that we are not being colonized and not allowing ourselves to be colonizers all the time.
Yeah, and also and or being conscious of where that is in our history, our life, and how that affects our both our from our ancestor side, but will imprint our, you know, future generations. Because when we look at it like that, we can see and be more conscious of what we carry with us. You know, really, I don't that vagina thing is very powerful, right? Because people don't know any other word for it, right? Most
Right.
people you talk to like that, they can't conceive what's they're really saying, you know. So
And you know, calling it down there, which is even worse.
yeah.
It's almost as worse.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're totally disconnected from that part of your body that is so powerful, and that does give so much of that the sexual parts of males and females are just so shamed, you know.
Yes.
And so, but to think about that word, I think that was in Anne Fry's book that Anne Fry's midwifery book that I first read that definition of vagina, and I was appalled. I was so distressed to hear that.
Exactly.
It's like,
Yep.
we just don't know it. And we say that all the time. And we teach that to our little female children, like, ew.
Yeah.
Ew.
So
it's
it's internalizing that. It's that violent internalization and that colonization process there, right there,
Yeah.
so.
Teaching that to our boys, it's just wrong. It's just really wrong. Well, does anybody else have any comments or questions, or just how are you feeling right now? Love to hear some voices.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karine. I just want to say thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Samsara. I learned so much, and you have a really great lecture and great information, and you are able to convey it really well and to be really easily understood, and it was really enjoyable. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you. I wish I could be there with you guys.
Well, you're there. What's
Yeah.
your name?
Or we could all be together, instead of in the ether.
Yes, yes, yes.
There's someone in the chat named Andrea
Mhm.
who asks if there's a way to compensate Sarah for her scholarly and emotional labor in her creation, not for rights, just to balance. And I love this work so much. It felt like opening a pomegranate.
Oh, thank you, Andrea.
You want to share your Venmo or some ways that people can give contributions to you?
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you. Let me see how. Okay, I have to pull up my Venmo. Let's see. Okay, I'll just put it in the link, and I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
So I think that's all you guys need, right? Just that little.
Yeah, and if they searched your name, would they find it as well?
Yeah, it's the name linked to it is Sarah Hussein. Or I'll also, if you want to text me, I can text you that code thing. Here's my phone number. So if you feel better texting it, because there's a billion Sarah Husseins. It's like a lot of us.
Just use your phone number.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
way. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And then also I'll send Samsara the PDFs of the slides and a PDF of my my thesis as well.
Mhm. So if you are not a member of Shipper Circle Community Doula Program, email me at oaklandbetterbirthfoundation@gmail.com. If someone could put that in the chat, oaklandbetterbirthfoundation@gmail.com, and just say, I would like to have the slides from tonight's presentation, and I'll get them to you. The members will get it over the WhatsApp, most likely, or the student portal, one of the two. Anything else? Any burning desires? So that being the case, I'm going to thank Sarah again. Thank you, Sarah Hussein.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure. I want to do this again. And definitely, when you get that book ready, you're going to come back and talk to us some more.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to know you and love you from when you didn't have any babies, and now you got two beautiful children, and you're all just so brilliant. So I'm just, you're another one of my present students. Hear me brag about all my other students, and you're one of my students that I get to brag about.
Well, thank you, Samsara. I appreciate it.
Welcome. It's true.
Okay.
And I want to remind folks that, if you can donate, to this, to the work of the Open Better Birth Foundation. That link is already in the chat. Please post it again, just so folks have it in case they need it. If you can't afford to make a donation, don't feel bad. We understand. We love you. We just want to be able to continue to do great work like this in the world and share this information with as many people as we can, and help our pregnant people, our beautiful community, and birth all of our pretty babies. And in my humble opinion, do God's work. You know? So I want to wish everybody a happy holidays, however you do that. My circle, I'll see you again next Tuesday. And for the rest of you, I wish you love and light. Is there any last thing you want to say, Sarah?
Oh, I saw that I accidentally just emailed you my Venmo and my phone number. So I think I sent it to everyone after, but if you guys need to contact me, Samsara can share that as well. She has my phone number.
Oh, you sent it to me privately.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like,
Okay, no,
I
it's
just
fine to
typed
know.
it. Okay.
The little check is so small. Okay, I'll figure
Okay.
it out.
Sure. Well, thank you again, everybody, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Sarah.
Goodbye,
you.
everybody. And so I just want to say to folks who might see this video in the future, it is going to be uploaded eventually to the Open Better Birth Foundation site, Facebook site. Please feel free to make donations at that time. Please feel free to like this video and to comment on it. And we thank you for your time and attention, whether it's this evening or in the future. We want to wish you peace and baby blessings. Good night, everybody.
Right, thank you.
Good night.
Nighty night.